Imagine being a young student walking miles every day under the scorching African sun. Dust rising beneath your feet, notebooks tucked under your arm, dreams too heavy for your worn-out shoes to carry. Now imagine one morning a convoy pulls into your schoolyard, engines humming, bright colors gleaming in the light. And a man steps out not as a politician, not as a ruler, but as one of you. He smiles, hands you the keys to a brand new scooter and says, "Go chase your future." That moment, simple, human, revolutionary, is what happened in Burkina Faso, and it's sending ripples far beyond its borders. This is not just about free scooters. It's about what happens when leadership finally believes that Africa's youth deserve more than promises. They deserve mobility, opportunity, and dignity. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré made a surprise visit to a group of university students and handed them free scooters, the news spread like wildfire across Africa. Videos of the event flooded social media, young people laughing, crying, shouting in disbelief, holding their new scooters high like trophies of a new beginning. The gesture seemed small on the surface, a few hundred scooters for students who struggle daily with transportation. But beneath that moment lay a story much deeper, much larger than the act itself. It was a message about leadership, vision, and the future of an entire continent. Because this wasn't merely about transportation, it was about motion, literal and symbolic. For decades, Africa's youth have been told they are the future, but too often that future has been postponed, trapped in the slow grind of poverty, corruption, and political indifference. Yet here was a young leader, barely in his 30s, sending a message loud and clear. The time for movement has arrived. Traoré's scooter initiative was not announced with pomp or ceremony. There were no scripted speeches, no staged applause. It was spontaneous, direct, and profoundly human. The young leader who rose to power in 2022 amid political turbulence had built a reputation for rejecting the luxury and distance of traditional leadership. This event, unplanned and unfiltered, embodied that spirit completely. To many Burkinabe, it was more than a gift. It was a symbol of recognition, a recognition that their struggles to reach school, to attend classes, to build their dreams in a country battling security challenges were seen and understood. For the students who received those scooters, it wasn't just the sound of an engine starting. It was the sound of opportunity, a hum of independence, of hope, of forward motion. But to grasp the full meaning of that act, we must look beyond the smiles and the celebrations. We must understand the context, the state of Burkina Faso, the spirit of its youth, and the vision of a man who believes that Africa's strength lies not in foreign aid, but in its own people. Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation in West Africa, has spent years struggling under the weight of insurgency, economic instability, and global neglect. In the past decade, thousands have been displaced, communities shattered, and education severely disrupted. Many schools in rural regions were forced to shut down. For students who persisted, the challenges were enormous: unsafe roads, long distances, and the simple cost of transportation that many families could not afford. It's within this environment that Traoré's act took place, not as a political stunt, but as a direct response to a lived reality. His government, already focused on securing the country and promoting self-reliance, understood that access to education isn't just about books and teachers. It's about mobility. A student who cannot reach school cannot learn, and a nation whose youth cannot move cannot progress. The decision to personally distribute scooters may appear minor in scale, but it was loaded with intention. It was designed to connect emotionally, not just administratively. Traoré wanted to be seen, yes, but more importantly, he wanted to see. He wanted to meet the students, hear their laughter, feel their energy, the pulse of a generation that still dares to dream despite adversity. In that schoolyard, surrounded by young men and women who had grown used to hearing promises but seeing little, something shifted. A bridge formed between leadership and the people. It wasn't built from policy documents or party slogans, but from a simple exchange of hands, the giving of keys, the locking of eyes, and the shared sense that something new was beginning. Observers across Africa noticed this gesture. Some saw it as symbolic populism, others as a genuine expression of a leader's empathy. But for millions of young Africans watching, it was inspiring, because they recognized themselves in those students, the long commutes, the exhaustion, the dreams that require effort, not privilege. And they saw, perhaps for the first time, a leader who acted instead of speaking, who delivered mobility in a world full of static words. That moment became a metaphor for something greater. Africa's next generation is not waiting to be carried. It is ready to move, if only given the means. Traoré's philosophy, as reflected in this act, draws from a deeper current that has been rising across the continent. From Dakar to Nairobi, from Accra to Addis Ababa, a new wave of African leadership is emerging. Young, bold, unafraid of breaking with the past. Leaders who do not wear Western suits as symbols of legitimacy, but traditional garments as symbols of identity. Leaders who understand that development is not just a number in a report, but a face in the crowd, a student, a farmer, a mother, a soldier. What makes Traoré's leadership so resonant is its authenticity. He has positioned himself as part of the people, not above them. In public appearances, his demeanor is calm but firm, his words simple but piercing. He speaks of sovereignty, of dignity, of Africa standing on its own feet. And that narrative has struck a chord with millions who have grown weary of dependence and disillusioned by decades of unfulfilled promises. But it's not merely rhetoric. The scooter event was one in a series of gestures that underline his belief in practical empowerment. Under Traoré's administration, efforts have been made to reorient national priorities toward education, infrastructure, and local production. He has repeatedly emphasized the need for African solutions to African problems. And this small but powerful act embodied that philosophy perfectly, because in the eyes of the world, giving out scooters may seem trivial. But in the life of a student who walks 10 kilometers each day, it's transformative. It means arriving to class on time, attending evening study sessions, reducing fatigue, and gaining precious hours to study or rest. It means freedom, and freedom in the context of education means everything for the international community. Accustomed to grand announcements and billion-dollar aid packages, this may appear like a story too small to matter. Yet the truth is that progress in Africa often begins with small, human acts that ripple outward, gestures that restore faith in leadership, community, and self-reliance. Traoré's scooters were not manufactured abroad. They were sourced locally, assembled within the country, feeding into a cycle of domestic growth and job creation. Each unit represented not just mobility for one student, but a micro-investment in the local economy, a demonstration of what self-sufficiency could look like when supported by intentional governance. And as those scooters began moving through dusty roads and narrow alleys carrying students to class, they carried with them something intangible but vital, the sound of Africa accelerating toward its own destiny. To understand why this moment resonates so deeply, we must explore the emotional dimension of youth identity in Africa today. Across the continent, young people make up over 60% of the population, yet they are the least represented in politics, economics, and governance. They live in the paradox of being the majority with the least power. But they are also the most connected, the most informed, and the most restless generation in African history. For decades, development models have spoken about the youth, rarely with them. Traoré's act was a reversal of that relationship. It wasn't just about giving something away. It was about listening, seeing, empowering. It acknowledged that the African youth struggle isn't laziness or indifference, but a lack of access. Once mobility and opportunity align, the results can be extraordinary. From a sociological perspective, such gestures serve as emotional catalysts, reinforcing trust between leadership and citizens. Studies have shown that when populations feel seen and supported, their motivation, participation, and civic engagement increase dramatically. In a nation like Burkina Faso, where insecurity and hardship have eroded confidence, such moments of connection are invaluable, and yet this is not a fairy tale. The challenges remain immense. The economy is strained, the threat of insurgency persists, and global pressures continue to weigh heavily on the nation. But amid all this, hope, that rare and fragile thing, has begun to reappear. In the words of one Burkina Faso student interviewed after receiving her scooter, "We used to think no one cared if we reached school or not. Today we feel seen. Today we feel part of something bigger." That is the essence of leadership, not the authority to command, but the ability to make people believe again. When the dust settled and the scooters rolled out onto the streets of Ouagadougou, a quiet sense of wonder filled the air. Parents stood outside their homes, watching their children glide past with new confidence, the engines humming like a chorus of change. What began as a single act of generosity had become a visible current running through the country, a movement of minds and wheels. But its power did not lie only in the material gift. It was in the message that the smallest gesture, when done with sincerity, could ignite an entire generation. For decades, African youth have carried the weight of inherited limitations. They have been told to wait, to be patient, to watch others build their nations for them. But this time, something felt different. Traore's message was not one of waiting. It was a call to action, a challenge wrapped in kindness. Move forward, build, take control of your path. For many, it was the first time they had seen a leader who treated them not as statistics, but as partners in progress. In that partnership, a new relationship between state and citizen began to form, one based not on promises, but on shared responsibility. The images of students riding their scooters to class spread quickly across social media. Videos flooded timelines in Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, and beyond. Hashtags celebrating African pride and independence began trending. Young Africans in cities thousands of kilometers away felt inspired, as if the dusty roads of Burkina Faso had become the starting line of a much larger journey. It wasn't about imitation, it was about inspiration. People began to ask what leadership would look like if empathy replaced ego, if practical solutions replaced long speeches. That question was echoing everywhere. Traore's gesture came at a moment when much of Africa was seeking a new narrative. For too long, the continent had been portrayed as a place defined by its struggles, its instability, its dependence on the outside world. Yet within every African city, village, and school, a quiet revolution of ambition was already underway. Young entrepreneurs building apps without investors, farmers using solar technology to irrigate dry fields, girls learning coding in community centers lit by candlelight, these were the real stories. The scooter event simply amplified what had already been growing: belief. Belief that Africa's transformation would not be imported. It would be created from within. Every generation produces its symbols. In the past, they were flags, songs, revolutions. Today, in a small West African nation, that symbol was a scooter key in the hand of a student. It represented agency, independence, and motion. For the first time in years, optimism began to feel tangible. The laughter of students riding to school was no longer a background noise. It was the rhythm of renewal. Across the continent, observers began to discuss what this act could mean for governance. Could such symbolic, people-centered gestures create lasting trust in leadership? Could they strengthen the bond between citizens and the state in places where that bond had long been fractured? History suggests that it can. From Nelson Mandela's embrace of forgiveness to Thomas Sankara's emphasis on self-reliance, Africa's greatest leaders have always been those who translate vision into human experience. Traore's scooters may one day be remembered in that lineage, not for their mechanical sound, but for what they awakened in the national psyche. Critics, of course, were quick to question the sustainability of such acts. Some wondered whether it was simply a moment of populism, a feel-good story amid deeper challenges. Yet even the most skeptical voices could not ignore the authenticity of the reaction. There was no sense of propaganda in the students' faces, no staged gratitude. What unfolded was raw, unscripted emotion, proof that sincerity in leadership still matters. It reminded the continent that genuine empathy could cut through the thickest layers of political cynicism. In that sense, Traore's action served as both a mirror and a message. It reflected the deep hunger for dignity among African youth and sent a signal to other leaders that respect and recognition are more powerful than rhetoric. When citizens feel seen, they participate. When they participate, nations change. It is a simple chain, but one that has too often been broken by distance between leaders and their people. This is where the story broadens beyond Burkina Faso. Because the question now is not what one leader did, but what this generation will do next. The future of Africa is not a single project or policy. It is a mindset. It is the understanding that true progress begins when education, technology, and leadership converge around a shared purpose: empowerment. The scooters were not the destination. They were the ignition. To understand Africa's bright future, one must first understand its youth. With an average age under 20, the continent is the youngest on Earth. That youthfulness is both a challenge and a treasure. It means energy, creativity, and a hunger for change, but it also demands opportunity. If that energy is nurtured, it can transform the world. If ignored, it can turn into frustration. Traore's act recognized that balance. It told millions of young Africans, "We see you. We trust you. Move forward. Beyond symbolism, there are practical lessons here." The initiative demonstrated how local production, small-scale investment, and targeted support can produce immediate results. A student with reliable transport is a student who can attend more classes, work part-time, and engage more deeply with community life. Multiply that by thousands, and you have a ripple that reaches far beyond the classroom. Productivity increases, attendance rises, and communities begin to see education not as a burden, but as a shared benefit. Every wheel that turned carried with it not only a student, but the possibility of national progress. It also invited reflection on what kind of development Africa truly needs. For decades, foreign aid programs have poured billions into infrastructure, often with limited local impact. Yet one act of direct empowerment executed by local leadership with cultural understanding achieved what countless international projects could not: connection. It redefined development as something done with people, not for them. That distinction could reshape how future African leaders think about governance. As night fell over the capital, and the city lights flickered like quiet stars, one could imagine those new scooters parked outside student dormitories gleaming under the moonlight. A few years from now, some of those students will become teachers, engineers, entrepreneurs, or leaders themselves. They will remember that day when their president arrived not in a parade of luxury cars, but on the same ground they walked. They will remember that someone believed in them enough to invest in their movement. That memory, perhaps, is more valuable than the gift itself. Africa's story has always been one of resilience. Empires have fallen, borders have shifted, and powers have come and gone. But the spirit of the continent has endured. What is changing now is the direction of that spirit, from endurance to creation, from survival to growth. Across the continent, young people are redefining what it means to be African. They are building their own economies through digital innovation, reclaiming their cultural narratives, and demanding accountability from those in power. The age of waiting is ending. Traore's action is part of this wider transformation. It stands as a symbol of what happens when leadership aligns with the heartbeat of the people. It shows that progress does not always require vast resources. It requires courage and vision. And most importantly, it proves that gestures grounded in humanity can resonate louder than any political slogan. In time, the world will measure Africa's progress not by the statistics of poverty or growth, but by the number of dreams fulfilled, by the number of students who make it to class, by the number of leaders who serve rather than rule, and perhaps by the quiet sound of thousands of scooters moving steadily toward tomorrow. There will be challenges ahead. There always are. Economic hurdles, political tensions, the long shadow of global inequality, all will continue to test Africa's resolve. But within those challenges lies an opportunity, the chance to define success on its own terms, to reject dependency and embrace unity. to prove that the youngest continent can also be the most visionary. The engines that started in Burkina Faso may one day echo across the continent, in classrooms, innovation hubs, and villages alike, because what began as a simple act of kindness has already become something larger, a metaphor for movement, a blueprint for leadership, and a spark of continental pride. The students who rode away that day were not just moving toward their universities. They were moving toward a different kind of Africa, one built on courage, self-belief, and shared destiny. And when history looks back, it may not remember the exact number of scooters distributed or the details of that sunny day in Ouagadougou. It will remember the feeling, the look on the students' faces, the realization that hope, once given wheels, can travel farther than anyone ever imagined. The story of Africa's bright future is not a dream waiting to happen. It is already on the road,